everyone, I'm Walima Vashti al-Ashariyah. I'm from the Kingdom of Callantyr, and today we're going to talk about from Infodump to teaching, because I finally figured out that Infodump is part of my process in developing a class, but it's best as part of my process in developing it and not as the actual class. So we're going to talk about how I moved from one into the other. This is the process that works for me. It does not mean that it has to be your process. It's not the right way or the only way. It's what I stumbled onto through trial and error. So take what works for you and keep figuring out what your process should be. So when I teach, pretty much always right after the title slide is my goals slide. And I usually have 3, maybe 4 of them. So for this class, we're going to cover how to develop goals. This is the most important thing I learned how to do. And I did this with the help of my peer, who is a textile historian and publishes articles every couple of years. So her background is much more academic history, and we figured out a few things from that that really work well in the SCA, and I've started trying to develop those further. We're going to talk about deciding who your audience is and what format works best for them, because those are decisions you should make kind of early on in putting the class together. And also that figuring out what your natural process is really important. And while info dumping is not necessarily a great class on its own, it's a really important part of my class development process. And when I identified that and I learned how to work with that as part of my process, developing classes got a lot easier. Goals are, and my goals slide is kind of the quick takeaway for what is the main focus of the class. If somebody can't attend and they just want your handout, this is the really important page. This is the overall thesis statement of your class. It's going to include, again, I usually have 3 or 4 statements on it. One of them is going to be a topic specific summary statement. What is the content of your class about? One of them is going to be a really broad cultural connection. Why is that important? Why should you want to learn about it? And then the third one is kind of my space to play depending on what this particular class needs. I do a lot of caveats there. I set the scope of my class. So I'm teaching later, and I'm teaching about women of the palace in Abbasid Persia. Okay. I'm not going to talk about 16th century Safavids. I'm not going to talk about India. I tell people right away the when and where of what we're going to talk about. When I teach about clothing, I teach a class about clothing in the Abbasid Caliphate, and I tell them up front, this class is not going to address veiling practices. There are too many of them. They're going to be their own class. I'm still researching it. I didn't want them to just be a footnote and move on in that class. So I've had people tell me, oh, that's too bad. I was really hoping to hear about that, but nobody's ever just left the class. And then they've not sat through a class hoping to hear about something that I already know I'm not going to address. So they're not horribly frustrated at the end. They know up front. And the people who told me, oh, I was hoping to hear about that, then told me, great class. I look forward to your class on veiling practices when that's ready, which is hugely motivating for me. We didn't get to the end of all of my work and had them go, well, why didn't you cover that? They know up front what they're getting into. It also helps prevent them from asking questions I'm not prepared to answer. They know ahead of time, I'm not going to be ready to talk about that. If you are teaching a class that is a lot of theory, I took these couple of pieces and here's my theory on how they connect. Okay, people know that, need to know that up front, just for honesty's sake, being fully open and disclosing everything. But if there's then information you encountered that contradicts your theory, put that in that goal slide up front, let them know you're aware of it. they're not going to pull it out as a gotcha moment later. Because if you go in hoping no one's gonna else has seen that, somebody has seen it and they're going to be excited to bring it out. If you address it up front, you've taken that away from that one asshole, because every class has somebody like that. And then it shows that you're doing your research, your theory is flexible, you're open to learning more. You can even ask for help. I'm aware of this. It doesn't really fit my theory yet. If you have more information about it, I would love to talk with you after class. Have people help you with your research. They'll be so excited that you want to know about this thing they found. So that third goal really can be whatever it is you need in your class. Whether I'm writing a research paper or teaching a class, my process is very similar. In particularly in that thesis statement, that topic summary statement, and that cultural connection statement, I rewrite them probably a dozen times in the course of developing the class. I write one at the beginning. Here's what I want to talk about. And then as I get going, sometimes the class or the paper took on a life of its own, and now I'm kind of talking about this other thing. That's where the evidence went. I found way more information over here than I did on my original idea. It's okay to change what the goal is. It's much better to do that and be clear about what it is you're talking about, rather than have a statement that's not really clear, or have a statement that doesn't actually fit the evidence you're presenting. You want the topic statement to be as specific as possible. Same thing with your broad cultural connection. It's kind of weird to say a broad statement should be really specific. You want it to be as clear as possible. And we'll get into examples of what I use for those statements, so you get a little better idea of what I'm talking about there. Before we get real specific and rewrite those goals statement, part of picking a topic statement is you have to pick a topic. And that can be difficult because everything is fascinating. And the more I read, I pick up more information, and I want to talk about that too. It can't all fit in one class. So I started out wanting to talk about the lives of Persian women. Okay, well, that's huge. Persia is kind of like the Rome of the East. It's all over the place, geographically and culturally and chronologically. That could be anywhere at any time, and it could be dozens of different cultures. So what am I actually talking about? Okay, most of my info comes from 8th to 11th century. That's the area that really caught my attention. They have a lot of things written down. I started doing that. So, okay, I narrowed that down from Persian women to the Abbasid Caliphate. Okay, that's still 300 years, and they covered a lot of geography. And there's more than one religion in there, and there's 3 or 4 different minorities. Okay, am I talking about Muslim women or Jewish women or Christian women or Zoroastrians or Manichaeists, or start narrowing that down. Get as specific as you can. That helps eliminate tangents. It makes it much easier for you to know what info belongs in this class. It's really hard when that info is really cool and you don't want to get rid of it. Editing is important. The more specific your goal statement is, the easier it is to see what fits. I don't throw that other info away because that's painful and it's so exciting, and I learned a thing and I found it. I take it out of this class and I put it in another Word document as a cool tidbit. It's going to be its own class later when I do more research related to that thing. It's just not this class. That made it much easier for me to cut things out because I wasn't throwing away my time, my effort, my excitement about that fact, my willingness to share that information. It was just, okay, it's going to be a class and I'm going to share that. It's just not this class. And that really specific topic statement in my goals helps me see what fits and what doesn't much easier. The cultural connection statement can be the hardest one. This is where you're building a connection between your specific topic and that bigger cultural picture. And this is really where teaching a culture class rather than teaching a hands-on or an activity-specific class is very different. Because if you're going to learn the thing, you're going to learn the thing. And that's the point of the class. With culture, okay, why is this exciting for you? Why is this interesting? Why should people spend an hour learning this thing? A lot of my classes focus on medieval Muslim women, and a lot of my cultural statements are about how, well, a lot of them boil down to fuck the Victorians, but it's about how even somebody with a background in history came into this with expectations that were very influenced by Victorian ideas and were very wrong. As somebody who came in, as a Western non-Muslim outsider, came in with lots of assumptions about medieval culture towards women, and about Islam towards women that were completely wrong. So my cultural connection statement talks a lot about our assumptions and generally accepted knowledge, because we have a lot of that about medieval Islam in the SCA. And those are those statements where just everybody knows that's true. Nobody cites that information. Women lived in seclusion. Plural marriage was a thing. Harems are a thing, and the whole idea of harems, that's what my class later is about. And our ideas are completely wrong. Okay, not completely. There is a kernel of truth to those statements. The more you try and apply them to a bigger and broader geographical and chronological and cultural area, the less accurate they become. And the way we apply them, they don't hold water at all. So my cultural connection statements are very much about our assumptions, generally accepted knowledge, the Victorians, and how we other different cultures, and the importance of cultural context in what we do. Again, the goals should change and become more specific the further you get in your class. So you'll start with what you think they're going to be. You'll start your research, you'll start your outline, and then there's this interplay between your outlining process and putting the class together and rewriting your goals. And the more you work back and forth between those two parts of the process, the easier each part of them is going to become. So these are kind of some examples of what I was talking about in terms of picking one main topic. I started with medieval Persia, medieval Muslim women. Medieval Muslim women is even a bigger topic. Persia was the beginning of my narrowing it down. Okay, and I ended up with classes on, marriage and divorce in the Abbasid Caliphate. Women of the palace, concubines and wives in the Abbasid Caliphate. Women's work in the Abbasid Caliphate. Okay, I'm telling you, with the Abbasid Caliphate, a geographic and chronologic designator. We're talking about a specific time and place. And then I had to even break that down because I started reading about women in this dynasty. And I had at least 3 different classes going on with the info I'm reading, even though I had already narrowed stuff down. And I ended up with 3 different classes. I'm working on a couple more. So it was like, okay, each time I read, and I thought I was going to have a class on women of the Abbasid Caliphate. That wasn't specific enough. I had so much different stuff. I kept cutting things out to be this other class another time. So again, with your cultural connection statements from the very beginning, think about why this interests you. Why do you want to learn about it? Why do you want to teach about it? Why is it important that we learn about this, particularly in the SCA, as people who are cosplaying as other cultures, sometimes minorities. This big cultural statement, these are the things that keep us in the realm of appreciating other cultures and doing things respectfully rather than appropriation. This is a really important goal, and it's important to think about this from the very beginning. So start broad, you kind of have to. That's the beginning of your thinking process, and keep refining it as you work. And as you do, you're going to end up with multiple topics, multiple classes, and maybe you don't want to do that much work. Those are cool ideas for later. It's okay. This took several years of work to get to 5 or 6 classes worth of stuff. You're starting with 1 class. That's all you're going to work on for now, because the amount of information you take in and having to work through what am I actually talking about, it's a lot of work, and you're going to end up with 1 class. This should by no means imply that you should end up with 6 classes ready to go. you're making one. Part of working from broad into a specific thing is that, yeah, you're going to end up with the potential to do lots of other things because you're going to identify lots of other topics that you kind of thought you were talking about, but that's not really what this class ended up being about. So moving from a topic statement into goals. This is, again, looking at that really kind of big picture and those cultural connections. What do all of your really cool facts, now that you've narrowed down a specific topic and you've started developing that topic statement, what do your cool facts actually say about the culture? So you picked a topic, you've narrowed it down, you've started doing research, you have all of these amazing facts you cannot stop talking about to anyone who will listen, and even some people who would rather not listen. My poor husband is a very good sport. I get excited about what I'm learning. He hears all about it. He will never take a class because he's heard it a dozen times already by the time I have a class ready. But those cool facts are all telling you something about this culture. That's how you're starting to build that big cultural connection statement. So I started out with medieval Muslim women. It was really cool to see how similar or different their lives were from what I was expecting, because as a woman in the SCA, lives of women is where I intersect with the SCA. I wanted to know more about it. And this was a culture that was really not being explored very well at the time that I started. So that's what I wanted to learn more about. And I ended up with a statement that the women of the Abbasid Caliphate had legal rights and were active in the economy. This is my statement from women's work class. Okay, so I talk about, and this is my topic statement for that class. Okay, it addresses where my assumptions were wrong. It gives you a little bit of really cool facts there. And I realized all of my facts were about, pointing me towards, okay, they were able to take cases to court. They had legal protections. They had property ownership. They owned businesses. They were, even if they were living in seclusion, they were active in the economy. And it was like, okay, these are all things I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. That's not what I was expecting. And I had a dozen of those facts. And I'm like, okay, what are they actually saying? And I kept trying to rewrite that sentence of, okay, here are the cool facts. I'm going to use them later in the class to support this statement. What is it all of these facts are telling me? They all come together, they all relate, and they're all pointing me towards what statement. And I eventually came out with that statement. And again, every couple of years as I do more reading, every couple of years as I teach this class multiple times, I still tweak these statements as I go, depending on, have I added new info? Have I taken out old info because it's not as relevant anymore to what am I talking about now? I've added enough new info. The class is too long and this doesn't really fit anymore. It's okay to keep adjusting your classes as you go. Keep them interesting to you. These are not a one and done thing. Otherwise, we'd get really bored with them and all that work we did would kind of go to waste after teaching once. Okay. Topics and goals. So, like I said, all of those cool facts, you're going to address them in this class. You are actually going to info dump at some point in your class. We're just going to organize it a little bit. And they shouldn't be just thrown at people right up front without the cohesion in the organization. That's where we get kind of muddled and we're not really sure what the class was about. We've got our goals statements. We've narrowed them down. We've made big connections with them. Your intro goal statements, your conclusion goal statements are very much related. They're just kind of reworded a little bit. We've got our topic statement. We've got our big cultural connections. We're going to start them at the beginning. We're going to state them again at the end. In between there, the actual meat and body of your class, these are your cool facts that you info dump. They are evidence of those statements you're making up front. Particularly if you have a theory that you're presenting to people. You're going to have evidence of that. And those are these cool facts and statistics and examples of artwork and Sometimes they're tax tables or lists of inventories and wills and bequests, and you have stats depending what type of research you do. And you're going to present them, and we're going to play with the order of them to make sure it flows and makes sense. I work with them kind of like an outline. If I were going to write a paper, this would be me outlining the thing. I actually do my outlining in PowerPoint because it's easy to move stuff around. Each slide would be a bullet point in my slide, or two would be a bullet point in my outline. Here's where I'm starting. Here's where I'm ending. Let's move these around till they make sense. I can see them all at once. I don't have to scroll a ton, and I can just drag and drop things. I find that a lot easier than working in Word. So we're going to start by grouping them by theme. And then here's my bridge. I want to get from one end to the other. Here are the facts that lead me across from my intro statement to my conclusion. And as I find more facts, I figure out where they fit and I rearrange things.
There's a question in chat. When you say cultural connection, what is that specifically that you mean?
So this is okay, cool topic statement. Women had more legal rights than I expected. Okay, who cares? Why is that important? Okay. Well, one of my other goals for that class is then we have a lot of generally accepted knowledge about medieval Muslim cultures. And our assumption about seclusion for women in medieval Muslim cultures is that that was a very passive thing. And our assumption about medieval Muslim women is that it's also a very disenfranchised and patriarchal society. And don't get me wrong, it is. But if you try to apply those statements to a specific culture at a specific point in history, it's wrong. So looking at the Abbasid Caliphate, women had legal rights. They owned property. They took things to court. So I start narrowing those kind of things down to a single statement. And forgive me, I don't remember. It's been a while since I've taught that specific class. So I tend to, and that one is going to be very class specific. Almost more so than my topic statement, because all of my topics are about medieval Muslim women. But as I talk about marriage and divorce, I tend to talk about, trying to think about what the one is for that class. With marriage and divorce, I tend to talk about our assumptions about what patriarchy and disenfranchisement are in medieval Muslim cultures. And they're wrong when we try to apply them to all medieval Muslim cultures rather than looking at a specific cultural context. So almost all of my big cultural statements for these classes talk about the fact that we talk about Muslim culture as one thing, and it's not. That's a very outside perspective. It's a very easy way of othering those cultures as a non-Muslim and a non-Middle Eastern person and a modern person looking at these cultures. It's really important to look at a specific cultural context and not make those big, broad, sweeping statements. So my big cultural connection statements are all about, here's my cool topic, and it's really cool, and it's important for us to learn about it because it keeps us from entering into appropriation, because it improves our study of history, because, what are we doing in the SCA and why is this important to us? Why is this interesting to us? Interesting may be a less intimidating word than important. Because starting out, I was like, I just find it cool and I'm a nerd. Why would anybody else think this was important? So go with interesting there. But I was gonna say, let me validate that for you right here. It is important. The fact that you find all of this stuff really cool, it's interesting, absolutely. For something to hold your attention to do more than one class on it, there's something there, because it's a lot of work to do a cultural history class and to do one well. So yeah, so big cultural statements tend to be looking at the importance of cultural connection, looking at the influence of Victorians on us, looking at our assumptions about another culture as an outsider and why it's important to dig so deep into them and be sure we're representing them well. Those tend to be my big cultural connections. And my nerd obsession tends to be related to women's lives. So most of the classes I take on those, are on those topics. Even when my friends are teaching about late period England, which is so not my thing, I go and I'm like, tell me all the info. And they actually tend to have fairly similar cultural connection points where, okay, we have a lot of assumptions about women, and here's how they're in this specific time and place. Sorry, I know that's a lot of rambling. The big cultural connection is probably the hardest one to write. And I rewrite those probably once a year, even if I haven't changed the class, because I think I found a better way to say it. So I hope that helped clarify a little bit what I try to do with that connection. Are there other questions in chat?
Just a comment, yay for differentiating cultures in the medieval Islamic world. This has been a goal of mine in the SCA as well.
Excellent. Yay. I love nerds. Okay, yeah, so we're going to start moving from goals into the actual meat of your class and what you're going to do with all of your cool facts, because we're going to line them up to support your ideas. And once you have those goals written and rewritten and rewritten, and you're starting to be happier with them and see how they're getting a little more specific, at the beginning, it's a struggle. Just get something written. You can't edit a blank page. Get something down, whatever your general idea is, and then you can start to refine it. Info dumping is my process. I talk things out. So I talked to my husband about these a dozen times during the course of building a class, and he's going, uh-huh. He does early Irish. He has no idea what I'm talking about. Now that we've figured out this is my process, he's going, oh, okay, I don't have to understand it. I don't have to remember it. I don't have to have a background in it, but I can ask some helpful questions. What do you mean by this part? What does that term mean? What does this mean? How does this connect? So he's gotten much better. I've gotten much better at telling him why I'm downloading to him and what I need from him, expect from him, would like from him in that conversation. And we've turned my info dumping into a really useful process, which has also made it much easier for him to say, I'm busy, I can't do this right now. Can we do this tomorrow night? And me not getting offended, because it's not just that I'm so excited and want to tell him about it and share that excitement with him. Oh, this is actually a useful thing for me, and he can help it be useful tomorrow instead of right now. And I've gotten more patient about when I info dump. It's not just because I'm excited and it has to happen right now because I'm excited. So we've turned that actually into part of my process. I also do that with my peer. I do that with my apprentice. Now that I've taken one, she and I both do that about our projects. And we set up at the beginning, I'm working on this. I need to info dump for process, not just excitement. And I want to share with you that I learned a thing. Okay, if it's for process, we will set a time where we can both intellectually and in terms of our schedule be there and ready to have that conversation. If it's just I learned a cool thing and I wanted to share it whenever. I'll get back to you and be super nerdy and excited with you when I can. So yes, info dumping is my process. If that is your process, I suggest embracing it, but being aware that that's what you're doing and what you need back from the other person, and being able to communicate that turned it from this really annoying neurodivergent thing that I do because I'm obsessed with the topic into something other people could understand and give useful feedback on. So, and again, I do this not just with each of the cool facts, but particularly with more with my SCA household rather than with my husband, who doesn't have a background in the topics I'm working on. We do this with the big picture statements too. So we'll do those and work on refining them with each other by talking them out, because that is much easier for me than writing them. and trying to refine them in writing. I work through it mentally better talking than I do writing. And once I've got it to the point where I can say it to somebody, I can start writing it. So as I say, if your process works better in writing, you may be able to do that more on your own than somebody who needs to talk it out. For me, I'm dyslexic and I have several perception disorders. What gets written on the page is not necessarily what I have in my head, and I can't actually see it until somebody else is like, do you realize this doesn't say that? Oh, okay. No. So writing is not where I start. Hey, the color in the background of my slides just changed. That's actually something that's very, very intentional when I teach. Especially teaching online where there's not the same kind of feedback and interaction as in an in-person class. This lets you know something has changed. This lets me know something has changed. So my first section is all about goals, has one color background. We're going to start talking about class formatting and some of the nuts and bolts of putting a class together. That gets a different color. Later on, there'll be another color. If we go off on a tangent, if there's an interruption, if somebody's just being rude and interrupting, whatever, I can come back and have a visual clue as to where I am in my class. It's much easier to get back on track. It also gives you guys a sense that time is passing and things are changing and it's not just another wall of text. So use it if it works for you. I find it really, really helps me because I know where I'm at in my class now. So when you start actually, we've done the research, we've started writing our goals, that's going to keep being an evolving process, but you're actually starting to put the class together. You've got lots and lots of notes and lots of info in your brain and you're all excited about it and you want to start organizing it to teach it. Who is your audience and what class are you teaching? Not in terms of topic, but in terms of presentation, what class are you teaching? These are conscious decisions. You can't always control who your audience is, but you should have an idea of that in mind when you put the class together. Who are you putting the class together for? So lots of people, when they first try to teach, particularly cultural history, say, I'm just going to do a general overview because they don't know what else to do. And they have lots of information. They haven't organized much, and they have all of this information and they want to share all of it. This is really, really hard to do well. As somebody who has done a ton of research on a topic, it is still hard for me to do it well because there isn't a framework for you to organize around. This is probably the hardest class type to do well. It is not, and it gets done in the SCA almost exclusively as introduction classes by newer teachers. And it is probably the hardest class type to teach well. So I always encourage newer folks to pick a different class format because it gives them an inherent framework to help with organization. So an example of a general overview class is Jello is period. Okay, it's not, this is a joke. This is something else I do either in the class or in the slide titles or within it. I do stuff that amuses me. It keeps my focus. It keeps my energy up midway through the class. Internally, I go, past me made a joke. Let's keep going. And it keeps my energy very happy throughout the class. So even if I have a headache or I didn't sleep well, or the picnic table I'm sitting at during an event is really uncomfortable, I see that in my handout and I get a little kick out of it and I keep going. Especially if I have to make up examples that are not real examples, that's where I put those things. I did a class on trade routes at one point, and and during an info dump session, we made a joke because it was on sea trade routes. So we made a joke of from Muppet Treasure Island. So we introduced as many Muppet references as we could during the class. I've had 2 people notice in 6 years. So it's like, oh, you're my kind of nerd. That's a new friend. So yeah, whatever you need to do so that you are not halfway through your class getting monotone and tired and uncomfortable and starting to present the info this way, do it. If it helps keep your energy going in a happy way, keep it there. So general overviews are sharing very basic cultural context. The language is usually kind of vague, and it's not a bad place to start. It's a very valid class format, but it is difficult for new teachers. I have found that I almost never teach this type of class now because I find the specifics and the cultural context so important. I don't want to do Art History 101 and give you a survey. I want to dig into one culture and give you the meat of it. This is a totally valid class structure if it's your thing. It gives you zero format to work with. You are going to have to use that third goal to limit your scope. Tell people what you're going to talk about, what you're not going to talk about, and tell yourself that those are going to be very arbitrary things that you set. You're going to have to set them and stick to them, and that's hard. Comparisons are much easier. I tell a lot of new teachers to start with a comparison class. So period Jello, English and German types. From the title, you know which two cultures they're going to talk about, and you know a little bit about how they're going to talk about them. So the language is starting to get more specific. We've already identified cultures. Hopefully you'll set your own scope and compare to the same century, at least in both cultures. That would be helpful. So we're going to get away from the medieval world and SCA period, because that is a huge chronology to deal with. So if you're going to compare two things, compare two apples, not two oranges. Pick a century. So you can start looking at, does the general information hold up? Are general assumptions hold up if you apply it to more than one culture? Is it true in one and not the other? Maybe it's not just generally accepted info then. Maybe it shouldn't be accepted because it's not true overall. That can be your big cultural statement. You can look at how the cultural contexts are different and how that led to differences if your comparison really turns into a contrast. Sometimes you start out wanting to do a comparison and then they don't compare very well. You end up with a contrast class. Here is how English and German types are different. Okay, why are they different? Or why are they the same? If you do end up having something that compares, you can look at what was happening in this time period, because eventually these two cultures end up being very different from each other. What happened that this thing in each culture at this time ended up being the same? How were these two cultures connected at this point in time? And again, that can be part of that big cultural statement. So yeah, you definitely get out of in period, SCA period, and they. Okay, who are you talking about? You have to tell me because there are two of them in this class. So this starts to bring you out of very generalized history and making it a little bit more specific and showing that you're starting to become some sort of subject specialist or a cultural specialist in a specific area. Okay, so a deep dive is kind of a squishy term when it comes to a class because the format still could be anything. But the example I have is period Jello, the development of lime flavor in the 13th century. So we're getting real specific just in the class title. What are we going to be talking about? You've got a really clear topic goal for this class. You've narrowed it down really far. There's not going to be any they or any in period. We know up front what century you're talking about and what subject you're talking about. So we're breaking things down even more specifically, and we're not going to look at all Jello. We're just going to look at lime flavor. And why is that one different than the rest? Why was it harder to come up with? Why was it? And it's not, I'm making all that stuff up. It's just, these are things you could look at. If you're going to focus on that one specific thing, your whole class is going to focus on that one specific thing. So more than just, here are all my cool facts about Jello. Here are all my cool facts about Jello in England and Germany, and look how different they are. It's, look at all my cool facts related to this one specific culture at this point in time. And isn't it fascinating that this developed this specific way? So you start to situate it inside that cultural context, more in a deep dive type of class. You're going to get into the use of very specific data. So whether that's specific art examples, and we'll talk about using those well, because that is a landmine. You're going to get into statistics and graphs and charts and taxes and legal records and all kinds of data, because let me tell you, we all start with a general overview when we first start teaching or writing papers because we don't want to bore people. People in the SCA coming to your class or reading your paper are nerds. We want those details. Give us the specifics. Don't just make the statement. Something they tell in school a lot for creative writing is don't tell me the thing, show me the thing. Okay, show, don't tell. Don't just make the statement. Show me where you got that info from. So don't just make the statement, support that statement with the evidence, wherever that came from. I would never have expected to be so freaking interested in tax charts and legal documents, but I am. That's the evidence for a lot of what I'm looking at, and wills and bequests and things. And it's like, this was not the kind of nerd I expected to be, but here I am. I'm really excited to find one that's been translated into English. So again, once you start getting into, here's my thing, I'm giving you the cultural context for it, people are going to start wanting that level of detail to support the statement you're making. And here's where we kind of get into trouble. We can fall back into just info dumping. Here is all this really cool data I've compiled. It can be overwhelming for your audience. It should be illustrating your big cultural connection or your topic sentence very specifically. Otherwise, it does not belong in this class. And as you present that kind of information, here's this thing. My big topic sentence is about marriage and divorce. Okay, we're going to talk about the court system and legal rights and property rights and marriage contracts and you can get kind of lost in the data now. At the end of each type of evidence that you present, reiterate your goals statement, tie that specific type of evidence back to the goal, and then move on to the next one. It's going to feel incredibly repetitive to you, who has spent 3 months, 6 months, a year studying this stuff and has been immersed in it for so long, and you just know how it all connects. Your audience doesn't have that background. It is okay to repeat. Each time you change what type of evidence you're talking about, reiterate how it supports one of your goals slides or one of your goals statements. Reiterate how it connects back to that main topic. Because sometimes it may feel to your audience like you've gone on a tangent and you took a left turn somewhere, and why are we talking about this? Oh, there's how it connects. You made it really clear. Make those really explicit statements at the end of each type of evidence that you're presenting. It's okay that it feels repetitive to you. It's very helpful to your audience. And the final class type is an argument. This is a little intimidating for folks in the SCA, both in terms of writing papers and teaching classes, because you're presenting your ideas. So, period jello, the myth. You may be contradicting other people. It's a little scary to do. So we tend to look at this as being an advanced level. And it is only because you have to have done a large amount of research to be able to make the types of conjecture you're going to make to present your own theory. So it takes a good amount of time and a good amount of legwork to get to the point where you can actually do this. At this point, you've consumed enough information that you're making connections between the sources that you've read that those authors didn't even make, because maybe they're written 5 years apart and those authors didn't have the other source to draw on, so they didn't address that stuff. And you're now going, well, I read this thing and I read this thing and I see how these things connect. Can I talk about that? Yeah, absolutely. That is doing history. History is interpretation. It's theory. It is very important to be upfront with people when you are drawing on somebody else's conclusions and when you are making your own. So it's very much okay to say, here are these statements, and I get that from this author or these authors. And then here's the connection I am making from them to this other piece. And here is the statistics, the tax charts, whatever, the legal documents, the cultural information that makes me think that's an appropriate conclusion to draw. We talk about it like hypothesis or conjecture, and we think, oh, I'm just making a guess. Okay, at this point, it should be a somewhat educated guess. You should have some evidence for that. That's a theory. That's what historians do. We're not professionals at it. You're going to be wrong, probably most of the time eventually. That's okay. Be very upfront about when you're making a conclusion yourself. And I've totally rewritten classes and presented them again as, come see how I was wrong. We have new information. Oh man, those are my best attended classes. Nobody wants to be wrong, but they'll all turn out to see you wrong. Embrace that. Address it up front. Don't try to hide that. And nobody is going to be able to, again, pull it out as a gotcha or throw it back in your face later on or say their classes aren't really worth taking because they were wrong about that thing because they taught it ages ago and never addressed again that there's new info and that theory was wrong. If you continue to keep researching the same thing, new information comes out. Professional historians are wrong every 10 years. There's a whole new theory. We turned a different direction and we decided they were wrong. And so again, every time you learn something new, your class should change a little bit. Sometimes we learn a dramatically new thing and the class changes a lot. That's totally fine. Just be very upfront about it with your audience. And I tend to present it in a very, in my class descriptions, I present it almost in a very self-effacing way. I literally have the phrase, come learn how I was wrong in them. In the class, I very much make it, hey, we learned something new and that's a good thing. I'm not self-deprecating in how I teach the class. I very much present it as learning new stuff is good. We have this fabulous new source that's now been translated into English because I have language barriers with my subject, or been released because the original information is Russian and we're not on good terms and they limit what info we have access to. Same thing with Chinese history. They very much limit what info we have access to. So, hey, this is now available to the English-speaking world. Changed everything with that one document. So yeah, it's totally fine to be wrong. It will happen at some point if you embrace it and handle it with some amount of grace and humor. Your audience is going to absolutely love it rather than it being a pain point for you or for them.
10-minute warning.
Oh man, I talked a whole lot. Okay. So I have my, give me a 5-minute warning as well, and I'll stop there for questions and whatnot. So I have my title slide, I have my goals slide. Almost the very next thing I have is a map. I lay out my context up front. After we address goals, I tell you very specifically, because let me tell you, who in the SCA knows what the Abbasid Caliphate is? It's Persia. But Persia is so many things, I needed to narrow that down. So, okay, what is the Abbasid Caliphate? I give them a map of what the Abbasid Caliphate was, and I tell them, here's the date ranges for it. They span 500 years, depending on which geography you look at. Sometimes it's only 300 years. Okay, when and where, very specifically. Because it's not just 10th century, okay, most of my evidence gets into 8th to 10th century, but is that the beginning of the dynasty? Are they stable? Is there a famine? Is there a plague? Is there a, if I tell you 10th century Persia, that may mean nothing at all to you. If I can tell you how long Islam has been in Persia by the 10th century, and that it's a stable dynasty at this point. And there are great food stores. You have an idea of what we're talking about now. Give them that kind of context right up front. It can be 2 sentences. I spend less than 2 minutes on that slide. It's really important before we get into the actual topic, because very few people that attend my classes are actually doing that level of research on this culture. They don't have that background. Give them 2 sentences to explain, here's the city and the century most of my evidence comes from. Okay. Most of my evidence comes from 8th to 10th century Baghdad, because that was the capital. That's where all the records were kept and the important stuff was happening. Okay. And then I tell them what that means in terms of the dynasty. Where are we? Are we at the beginning? Are we at the collapse? Is it a plague year? Is it a famine year? Is it a drought? Is it a flood? What are the people they're experiencing before we dig into our topic? And then, so where, when, and who, your context. Who is what I spend the most time on. Where is a map? I spend almost no time on it. I show them the map. I barely say anything about it. It just gives them a sense of where we're talking about. I talk about when a little bit more for context, but then who gets probably 3 or 4 sentences instead of just 1 or 2. Because Persia is not just Persians. It's Arab Islamic people. It's Persians. It's Central Asians. It's Turks. It's 5 different religions. It's Armenians. It's Spaniards, depending on what time period you're talking about. It's Byzantines, depending on what time period you're talking about. So which people are you talking about in terms of Persia? And what are the major rules for that particular subset of this culture? Your audience doesn't have that background. I'd say 99 times out of 10, they don't have that background. So give them a couple sentences about it before you dive into your topic. Set the stage. So title slide, goals slide, a map where I give you 3 or 4 sentences situating the culture we're going to talk about, and then we dive into the class. Oh my gosh, outlines. Outline everything. Outline repeatedly. If you feel you're getting stuck, stop what you're doing and make an outline. Here's my statement, beginning and end. That's what this evidence is, that's what this evidence is, oh, this doesn't fit. That's why I got stuck. Let's get that out of there. Now it flows. Or those 2 things should be reversed. Okay. Outline top to bottom and bottom to top. Every time you get stuck, look at an outline so that you don't get lost in the weeds of all of the cool facts you have, and you can see what the organization is doing. Okay, I've talked about that already. Hey, we have a color change. Something else is happening. Artwork. Oh my goodness. Unless you are teaching a class specifically about art history, artwork can be a landmine, because we pull it in as examples to stuff, but we have not done the legwork on it, and that is an SCA-wide problem. If you are doing a cultural history class and you are just pulling artwork from that culture to break up the wall of text, fine, absolutely fine. I do the same thing. If you are using it as evidence of something, you have to do more legwork. How you interpret that piece of artwork is not valid unless you do the legwork. That culture has a language in its art that the artist knew, that the patron knew, that everyone in that time and place who viewed it understood, and we have no idea about it. So this is stuff like in European Renaissance art. A lot of people were illiterate. The major art is biblical because they couldn't read the Bible.
5
Virgin
minutes.
Mary wears the color blue. Mary Magdalene has red hair. John the Baptist wears a bearskin. They can tell you who's in that painting and what's happening. Thank you. We do not have that level of detail for Persian paintings. I keep trying to find it. I haven't found it all yet, but you have to give some sort of context and some sort of background before you can use artwork as evidence for anything. What you see in that painting does not mean you're understanding it correctly, does not mean the contemporary audience saw it the same way. Use it to break up a wall of text, absolutely fine. If it's evidence, you have to do a bit more work. I think this is actually my last slide. Practice stuff out loud. You might have written it down fine and now it's a tongue twister when you try and say it. That happens. Breathe. It's going to feel like it's taking forever, but if you get flustered at something or someone asks you a question and you need to think, just take 2 breaths. Feels like forever to you, your audience won't even notice. Your answer will be much more calmly presented. Not that I usually run out of time, but if you do, talk about your bibliography. What info you got from what sources, which one was your favorite, what's the most affordable. People absolutely loved that. I will actually share this on the University of Atlanta Facebook page so you can get the last couple of things. These are just actual tips for teaching and how to deal with questions and interruptions. But I will go ahead and open up for questions for you guys before we run out of time completely.
And we actually have a break right after this, so
Oh,
if
perfect. So we
people
can
want
chat for a
to
little
stay
bit if you
on
have more
after,
questions.
they are welcome to.
Yeah. I was gonna say, questions are always good. It's always okay to say you don't know. Thank the person for asking the question. Tell them it's a great question. You don't know yet. Tell them if they find the answer, please share it. You would love to hear.
Will the PowerPoint be available after the class?
Yes, I will share that out on University of Atlanta has a Facebook page, right?
There's a Facebook page. You can also send a link directly through the class portal on the University of Atlanta website.
Perfect. I will share that out. Yeah, Lady
Question.
Squirrel, go for it.
So I have a bunch of books on my topic. Will they
Mhm.
help like along with like PowerPoint or as the artwork that you're talking about?
So it totally depends on the format in which you're teaching. I teach online a lot, so I use PowerPoint a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And with cultural history, unless you're teaching about the artwork, it's just a bunch of words on slides. So I tend to pull in images from my culture to just break that up. Teaching in person, I often don't bring a handout because we're at a camping event and it gets stepped on and it gets rained on and they spilled food on it and it got crumpled in the bottom of a bag. And why did I spend the time printing that? I bring a piece of paper with a QR code on it and they can scan it if they want the thing. I share the link to it on our Kingdom page later, so people can have it even if they couldn't make the class. But to those types of events, I bring a tote with a few books in it. If the artwork is important, we can open it up and share it there. But if you are sharing that artwork and it is evidence of a statement you are trying to make in your class, you're going to have to do a bit more research on that artwork than just here's the picture and here's what I see in it. Now, if it's a cool example of what they were doing, cool, share it, absolutely. But if you're trying to draw a conclusion and you're using that piece of artwork as evidence for your conclusion, you're going to have to know a lot more about what led to the development of that piece of artwork and how that contemporary audience understood it before you can really draw conclusions from it.